life used to seem much simpler and far less restricted. Kids rode in the trunk, adults smoked everywhere, and no one seemed to care. Rules were loose, freedom was abundant, and danger felt normal. But today, many of those everyday habits would get you fined, or worse. Let's look back at 25 things we all did in the 1980s that are banned today. In the 1980s, driving after drinking wasn't taboo. It was considered a casual, socially accepted behavior. People considered having just a few beers before driving home at the end of the evening a minor thing. Drivers often got into their cars and drove home after finishing the evening, without thinking about legal or safety consequences. The culture at the time tolerated this dangerous behavior, even when it frequently led to accidents. The truth is, even at festivals or small barbecues, people drank beer freely before getting into their cars, treating the risk to life as part of the evening. This contrast is truly shocking. Today, just one glass of alcohol can land you in serious legal trouble, leading to license suspension or even jail time, depending on the blood alcohol concentration. But in the 80s, people simply accepted that a driver with a little buzz was normal. The term designated driver was not yet everyday vocabulary. The concept was just beginning to emerge and hadn't truly permeated public consciousness. This lack of regulation reflected a lack of awareness regarding the serious danger this behavior posed to the driver and the community. Looking back, it's clear how blurred the line was between personal maturity and danger. This change only came after campaigns against drunk driving were intensified and laws were significantly tightened, turning a socially accepted behavior into a serious crime. If you didn't smoke in the 1980s, you still had to live in a sea of smoke. Cigarette smoke permeated every public space, from restaurants where entire families were dining, to offices and even grocery stores. Ashtrays were placed on every surface, from desks, supermarket checkout counters, to dinner tables. Shoppers walked around the supermarket with cigarettes dangling from their lips, and no one considered it a problem. Work and living environments were dominated by smoke. Non-smoking areas were almost useless because the smoke inevitably lingered and spread between them. The most shocking thing was perhaps on airplanes. On planes, there were smoking sections that filled the entire cabin with smoke, forcing all passengers, including children, to inhale the smoke inevitably throughout the journey. Parents smoked in closed cars even with children in the backseat. The culture at the time fully accepted this level of exposure to smoke and toxic chemicals. Pickup truck beds were a place for fun, especially after sporting events or during weekend gatherings. Children piled up in the truck bed, sat on the tailgate, or danced in the open bed without any safety restraints. This was considered fun, a symbol of freedom, and an indispensable part of life, especially in rural areas. But this freedom came with extremely high risk. A sharp turn, a sudden brake, or a minor collision could throw passengers, especially children, onto the pavement or highway. But at the time, people only thought about the fun and freedom of feeling the wind in the truck bed. Safety was almost an afterthought, rarely considered. Recognizing this danger, this practice has been banned in most places worldwide due to the high risk of injury and death. This culture of casual risk-taking clearly demonstrates the difference between the safety standards of the 80s and today's strict traffic safety regulations. This acceptance of risk reflects a time when adult supervision of children's activities was much looser, and the consequences of accidents were often overlooked or considered an inevitable part of life. Today, children not wearing seatbelts in cars is unimaginable and would certainly result in a heavy fine. But in the 1980s, things were shockingly different. Children often lay down, built pillow forts in the cargo area of station wagons. They slid from seat to seat and even played hide-and-seek in the car while it was speeding down the highway. Parents rarely enforced seatbelt usage, considering it unnecessary or a hassle for the children. The shocking truth is that entire families sped down the highway at high speeds while children rolled around the car. Leaving children unrestrained in the car was considered normal, even a form of freedom in family life. Looking back, this behavior demonstrates a lack of awareness regarding the risk of serious injury in case of sudden braking or collision. Safety rules regarding seatbelts and child seats began to be implemented, but it took a long time for them to become the norm and a legal requirement. This culture of risk acceptance in cars is a prime example of the fundamental shift from a culture valuing innocent freedom to one prioritizing safety and legal responsibility. The image of children freely rolling around in the cargo area of a station wagon, building pillow forts, is now just an unbelievable memory of a time when the boundaries of personal safety were blurred. Furthermore, leaving children unattended in cars was a common practice in parenting. Parents often cracked the window a little, gave the children snacks, and left them in the car while they ran into the grocery store, post office, or mall for 20 minutes or more. In an era when people trusted strangers more, this behavior was considered normal and convenient. The culture at the time called this a liberal parenting method, encouraging independence and reducing tight adult supervision. Sometimes the children left in the car were on hot vinyl seats under the sun, and just imagining it is enough to make one shiver at the level of danger. Today, this behavior can lead to the intervention of Child Protective Services and even legal trouble due to heightened awareness of the risks of abduction, heat stroke, or other dangers. This shift reflects a loss of innocent trust in the community and an increase in awareness of potential threats to children. The image of a parent comfortably leaving their child in the car to run errands for a significant period is shocking to modern parents. Over time, society has shifted from prioritizing personal convenience to a society prioritizing maximum safety for children. Thumbing a ride by the side of the road was once a practical part of life. It was a widely accepted way to travel, especially for teenagers trying to get to the mall, workers without cars, or college students heading home for the weekend. The culture at the time was built on an innocent trust in strangers, a concept that has almost completely vanished today. People rarely forbade their children from hitchhiking, only reminding them to be careful. A child could hop into a passing car and be dropped off at school or a friend's house without too much worry from the parents. The truth is, drivers often saw picking up a hitchhiker as a neighborly act or a community obligation. This act was seen as helping someone, not risking one's life. Teenagers even boasted about their hitchhiking adventures, considering it a significant milestone of independence in the process of growing up. Although stories about the dangers of hitchhiking existed, they were often dismissed as distant urban legends rather than a real everyday threat. The freedom and convenience of this practice were hallmarks of the 80s. It was a cheap and efficient means of transportation. Thank you for watching. To continue viewing more content, please hit the hype button right below the video to support us. In the 80s, buying cigarettes was as easy as buying candy. Cigarette vending machines were commonly placed in diners, bowling alleys, and even some grocery stores. With just pocket change, teenagers could easily buy cigarettes without ID or adult supervision. Tobacco companies placed machines where children frequented to ensure this smoking habit started early, a strategy now considered unethical and illegal. This easy access contributed to high smoking rates among the youth. Today, laws have completely changed. Buying cigarettes requires valid ID, and vending machines have been banned in most public areas to prevent access by minors. The culture at the time saw this as a convenience, a part of the public environment, but today it is considered a public health threat that must be tightly controlled. The widespread presence of these machines in environments frequented by children is a clear reminder of the regulatory laxity of the 80s compared to current strict health and safety standards. In the 1980s, the sight of first graders just 6 or 7 years old walking to school alone was perfectly normal and unsurprising. Groups of children, backpacks bouncing, walked, chatted, and laughed on the sidewalk without an accompanying adult. This was a matter of practicality and maturation. Parents often worked early shifts. Buses didn't always cover every street, and walking was the simplest solution. This carefree attitude was a hallmark of a culture that prioritized independence and self-management. Crossing busy roads without a crossing guard was considered part of growing up. Children learned independence with every step, even when facing rain or snow. What is notable is the high level of mutual trust within the community at the time. Strangers waved hello as the children passed. Store owners looked out their windows to keep an eye out, and neighbors trusted the community to watch out for each other. Parents were not worried about constant supervision as they are today. By the time children reached 4th grade, self-travel was almost expected. The pride of getting to school on their own 2 feet was a powerful feeling for 80s children. Leaving children home alone for many hours or even overnight was a common and socially accepted practice. It was normal to have a 12-year-old girl babysit younger siblings, and sometimes even children as young as 10 were entrusted with looking after the house until morning. The culture at the time prioritized independence and viewed this behavior as a sign of maturity. Parents trusted their children in ways that seem shocking today. Instructions were often simple: lock the door, don't answer the phone, and call the neighbor if something happened. Delivered pizza filled the void, and TV kept the kids entertained late into the night. Although risks were always present, such as fire, accidents, or emergencies that could put children in difficult situations, the culture at the time viewed leaving children to look after the house themselves as an integral part of the maturing process. Children entrusted with holding down the fort often boasted about that responsibility, wearing it like a badge of maturity. They felt the thrill of being the main person in charge, even if they were only 12 years old. Setting up a table to sell lemonade or baked goods on the sidewalk required nothing more than a folding table and a few Dixie cups. This was an innocent tradition and considered a child's first business lesson. Children freely sold homemade baked goods and sugary lemonade to neighbors without a business license, hygiene rules, or any regulations. People believed in the community spirit. Parents encouraged it, giving their children a few dollars for ingredients and sending them out to earn money. Strangers stopped without hesitation, dropping coins into the jar and chatting with the young vendors. The disregard for hygiene is astonishing in retrospect. No one checked the ingredients and sanitation was barely considered. A dirty pitcher or a sticky countertop didn't scare anyone. People understood that children were just having fun, and neighbors trusted them. The feeling of pride when counting the money earned after a day of sales was a memorable experience. That simplicity has been strictly limited. Laws in many areas have made it illegal to sell food and drinks without a permit, even for children. If you grew up during this era, you might remember those household hair dryers, especially the 1960s models that looked like they just stepped out of a hair salon, but completely lacked modern safety checks. Early handheld models, or those with large hoods, often had metal casings and thick wires that tended to fray quickly. This created a dangerous scenario. You plugged the device into the wall, stood near the sink, and hoped everything went smoothly. The biggest risk was the lack of grounding or adequate insulation. If your fingers were damp, or if the wire was faulty and came into contact with water, something almost inevitable when used in the bathroom, it could turn the hairdryer into a dangerous electrical short fireworks display. The metal casing heated up, and the motor sometimes sparked. Nevertheless, people still trusted and used them because they wanted a sleek salon look, accepting the risk for the sake of beauty. Fortunately, the electronic household appliances in your home now must comply with strict safety rules, including the ground fault circuit interrupter, GFCI, to prevent electric shocks. The 80s was a time obsessed with achieving a dark and fast tan, and the common summer ritual to achieve this was sunbathing with baby oil and reflectors. Baby oil was applied to the skin with the belief that it would heat the skin and attract the sun's rays more effectively. Silver reflectors were used to bounce the sun's rays directly onto the face, ensuring that even the hardest to tan areas were exposed to maximum UV intensity. The most shocking aspect was the complete disregard for the risk of skin cancer. Sunscreen, if used, often had a very low SPF, usually below 4, and people often avoided them because they interfered with the tanning process. Terrible sunburns after a long day in the sun were considered only a minor inconvenience, part of the process of achieving the desired skin color. This culture has fundamentally changed as awareness of the harmful effects of UV rays and the risk of skin cancer has increased. In the family medicine cabinet, mercurochrome was an indispensable item. This was a bright red liquid used to disinfect and apply to open wounds, cuts, and scrapes. It was considered a panacea, a quick way to sterilize wounds. Unbeknownst to many, the shocking truth is that mercurochrome contains mercury, a toxic heavy metal and neurotoxin. Although it was effective as an antiseptic, applying a toxic substance to an open wound, making it easy for the poison to be absorbed into the body, was a serious medical risk. The risk of mercury poisoning through the skin has led to this product being banned or phased out of the market in many countries, or only permitted for use under strict supervision. The presence of such a toxic chemical in a widely used over-the-counter product, considered normal in the 80s, illustrates the lax regulation of medical products and toxic awareness. If you are recalling playground burns or the smell of cigarette smoke, share this video right now with your friends who grew up in the 80s. Don't take your eyes off the screen. Many more interesting things await. Peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, PB&J, were an essential lunch item, a mainstay of student lunches. Peanut butter was served daily in various forms in schools, and no one considered it a problem. What is surprising is the complete absence of allergy warnings or recognition of serious allergies. In the 80s, severe allergies were rarely recognized, and if they were not seen as a public health threat requiring regulation. Peanut butter was considered a cheap and convenient source of protein. Today, everything has changed drastically. Awareness of peanut allergies has led many schools to enact policies banning peanuts entirely, creating strict peanut-free zones to protect students. The transition from viewing peanut butter as a basic, safe food to seeing it as a potential threat is a testament to the increased awareness of public health and the legal responsibility of educational institutions. In the 1980s, soda vending machines were a familiar sight in school hallways. Machines selling Coca-Cola, Pepsi, or Mountain Dew were scattered throughout the school. Students had easy access to large amounts of caffeine and sugar throughout the school day. It is important to note that schools often profited from these sales, encouraging the maintenance and promotion of sugary drinks to students. There was no concern about nutrition or the impact of caffeine and sugar on children's behavior and health. However, today, increasing concerns about childhood obesity and nutrition have led to soda machines being banned from most schools or only permitted to sell healthy beverages. The presence of these machines in schools is a clear example of how 80s schools prioritized profit over the nutritional health of students. Selling homemade baked goods at school was a common and beloved fundraising activity in the 1980s. Homemade cakes and cookies were sold without ingredient labels or any allergy warnings. Treats containing peanuts and nuts were placed next to everything else on the same table, with a very high risk of cross-contamination. Although this was an innocent social activity, the lack of hygiene rules and labeling created significant health hazards. Low awareness of allergies and legal liability meant no one questioned the origin or ingredients of these baked goods. Today, strict labeling laws and allergy awareness have nearly ended this type of unregulated sale. Schools now require food products to be professionally packaged and clearly labeled to ensure the safety of all students. The unsafe homemade bake sale is a classic example of the difference in food safety management between the 80s and the present. The 1980s was a period when safety standards for toys were much looser than they are now, to the point that an idea that sounds crazy could actually make it onto store shelves. Imagine, you're browsing a toy store and you see a toy called the Bag of Glass Toy Kit. Sounds like a joke, right? The truth is, it was actually a joke. The product was inspired by a famous comedy sketch, and thanks to the carefree attitude of novelty companies, that joke became a bizarre reality. Inside that small clear package were meticulously designed pieces of sharp plastic that looked exactly like real broken glass. In some versions, they even felt like broken glass. Although some versions were labeled as safe plastic, many others were not so clear. The purpose of this toy was for children to use for pranks or simply for amusement. This was a product intentionally designed to be dangerous and sharp, sold openly without strict oversight from product safety commissions. Although decorative spray-on snow for holiday windows was most common in the 1960s, they were still in use and considered normal in the 1980s. However, older versions of this spray snow often contained lead-based pigments, a dangerous neurotoxin. Lead is an accumulating poison, causing serious damage to the nervous system and health, especially in children. The use of a household product containing this toxic heavy metal, especially in the home environment, illustrates the lack of awareness regarding chemical hazards. It is for this reason that the use of lead in consumer products has been strictly banned. Lead-containing spray snow vividly illustrates how toxic chemicals were allowed to circulate freely in the home environment, accepted for decorative purposes without thought for long-term health consequences. You probably remember this item. Toy guns weren't always brightly colored and safe like they are now. Children often had BB guns or cap guns that were painted black, heavy, and detailed just like real weapons. Neighbors and police often overlooked it, considering it harmless play. The great risk was that these realistic-looking toys could easily be mistaken for real weapons, leading to serious consequences. Neighborhood children even organized BB gunfights, shooting pellets at each other with little or no protective eyewear. Wounds and bruises were shown off as trophies, while serious risks like eye damage or tooth loss were often ignored. It wasn't until later that new laws required toy guns to have bright orange or neon tips to easily distinguish them from real weapons, aiming to minimize the risk of accidents and unfortunate misunderstandings. This change reflects increased safety awareness and the necessity of clearly distinguishing between toys and dangerous weapons. High school chemistry labs in the 80s were exciting because they were risky. The labs were full of real chemicals, open flames, alcohol burners, and glass equipment, often handled by loosely supervised teenagers. Students performed experiments with real acids and volatile reactions. The most shocking thing is that safety goggles were often optional or considered unnecessary by the students. The chaos and danger were part of the experience, seen as stimulation, academic adventure. Today, strict regulations have been implemented, requiring tight supervision, mandatory safety equipment, and restrictions on dangerous chemicals. The acceptance of this high level of danger in an academic environment is a clear testament to the laxity of school safety standards at the time. In this era, corporal punishment in schools was still common and considered normal in many parts of the United States, especially the South and Midwest. Paddling students with a thick wooden ruler was accepted school policy, referred to as discipline. It is noteworthy that parents often supported the school in using this punishment, viewing it as character building and an effective method to maintain order. Lining up at the principal's office or seeing friends receiving the paddle was an accepted reality. A short time later, corporal punishment was banned in most states due to awareness of children's rights and the psychological and physical harm. It was realized that deterrence through physical punishments would only make the child more defiant. Instead, the best approaches in education are concern and listening, rather than using violent actions. If you have ever had to line up at the principal's office or saw friends receiving the paddle, share your experience in the comments section. Sharing your story helps this video reach more people. Independence Day in the 1980s meant fireworks, and children had no difficulty buying them. Roadside stands, often makeshift wooden shacks, sold Roman candles, bottle rockets, and even extremely powerful types like M80s to children with just a few dollars in their pockets. The thrill of walking up to a shack full of explosives was part of the holiday. Parents often turned a blind eye. Some even sent their children to buy fireworks while they prepared the barbecue. No ID, no rules, just a cash exchange and a paper bag filled with sparks and danger. Setting off fireworks with very little or no adult supervision was almost a childhood tradition. Of course, accidents were common. Burns, lost fingers, and small neighborhood fires were part of the risk. By today's standards, the idea of handing powerful fireworks to unsupervised children is considered reckless. Laws have been strictly tightened, banning the sale of these powerful fireworks in many areas or applying strict age rules. This acceptance of casual risk shows a laxity in product safety regulations and a lack of adult supervision that is unacceptable today. Public pools in the 1980s often operated under one simple rule: swim at your own risk. Children dove, raced, and wrestled in the water with no professional lifeguard in sight. Parents often dropped their children off at the pool for the whole afternoon, trusting they would manage themselves. The pool was a place of chaos. Water splashed from cannonballs, wrestling games made children fall into the water, and accidents were common. Although the risk of drowning was always present, the community often self-managed. When accidents happened, older children or nearby adults would jump in to help, rather than relying on professionally trained personnel. The smell of chlorine clung to everything, from swimsuits to towels as children played for hours under the intense sun. This lack of authority gave children a sense of endless freedom. But to avoid later risks, public health and safety regulations now require pools to have trained lifeguards, clear rules, and mandatory safety equipment. The fact that children were once free to swim in potentially deadly waters without any professional supervision is shocking in retrospect. In the 1980s, the bicycle was synonymous with freedom, and safety equipment was almost non-existent. Children sped down hills, performed bike stunts, and raced each other across intersections without helmets, lights, or reflectors. A scraped elbow was a badge of honor, and hard crashes were just part of the game. Parents rarely required helmets. Helmets were considered for motorcyclists or children with overly protective parents. Children often customized their bikes, attaching baseball cards to the wheels to create a roaring engine sound. Some even removed their brakes to make the bike lighter, even though it meant stopping with their feet. Children rode in groups, crossing intersections, cutting through fields, and challenging each other to go faster. Falls sent children flying over the handlebars, but they picked themselves up, dusted off, and continued playing. Parents might glance out the window, but rarely intervened to stop the chaos. This lack of safety was a sign of independence. However, today, helmets and safety equipment are mandatory in most places. You remember on Halloween night, you and the neighborhood kids wandered around the neighborhoods for hours, sometimes out until midnight. Parents rarely followed along to supervise. Halloween was for kids, and adults stayed home to hand out candy. We walked for miles, crossed busy streets, climbed strangers' doorsteps, and stuffed pillowcases full of candy until they were too heavy to carry. The darkness only added to the thrill. Strangers' houses were considered legitimate places to knock. Most importantly was the innocent trust in the culture at the time. No one questioned whether the candy was safe, and no one checked on their children's status every hour by phone. Parents trusted their children to return when they were done, even if it was after midnight. Unsupervised trick-or-treating was considered an important milestone of independence. Everything has changed drastically today. Trick-or-treating often ends early, and parents follow closely behind their children, shining flashlights and checking every piece of candy due to concerns about safety threats. 1980s playgrounds were built with the goal of being durable rather than safe. It was a challenging environment where play equipment like swings, monkey bars, and towering metal slides were installed over surfaces paved with asphalt or concrete. If a child fell, and they often did, the impact was severe and unforgiving. Those towering metal slides would burn bare legs under the summer sun. Monkey bars stretched high, challenging children to climb higher than safe levels. Cuts, bruises, and even broken bones were part of the game, and children wore them like badges of honor. Parents rarely intervened. A scraped knee would be washed with a hose, and the children would immediately return to play. Teachers supervising recess barely batted an eye at children falling onto the hard asphalt. The culture at the time viewed this as a necessary lesson in learning to cope and avoid injury themselves. As modern life has evolved, playgrounds are now designed with safe padded surfaces, using rubber mulch or similar materials and adhering to strict regulations. This difference illustrates the transition from a culture that accepted risk and courage to one that prioritizes absolute safety for children. Colliding with the asphalt, thus dusting oneself off and running right back to the swing without a second thought, is an unforgettable memory. What comes from leaded exhaust is a polluted atmosphere and damage to children, like brain damage, learning disabilities. Kids rode bikes without helmets and nobody batted an eye. The 1970s were truly carefree, a period where freedom often blurred the lines between fun and danger. It's hard to imagine what was once considered normal. Let's take a look back at 25 things that were perfectly fine then but would be illegal today. Childhood in the 70s was a limitless adventure. For many, train tracks were not just shortcuts from one neighborhood to another, but exciting and adventurous playgrounds. Children often spent considerable time around the tracks, challenging each other to tightrope walk on the shiny metal rails, testing their dexterity and courage. Another classic pastime was placing coins on the track and waiting for the rumble of an approaching train to flatten them into thin pieces of metal, a unique and, in the mindset of the time, harmless type of souvenir collection. The attitude towards rail safety back then was extremely casual and relaxed. On the way home from school, you might see groups walking along the tracks or even attempting to cross a high trestle bridge over a deep ravine as a real adventure. The thrill multiplied when they heard the distant rumble of the approaching train, but that did not stop them from daring each other to continue. Decades later, facing the danger, that picture has completely changed. Trespassing laws for railway areas are extremely strict and rigorously enforced today. When winter came, the 70s children's search for thrills did not diminish, but merely shifted to a more dangerous form: hooky bobbin. This was one of the most adventurous things kids did back then. The game involved children clinging tightly to the back of a moving car and sliding along icy roads, turning it into a makeshift skiing adventure. Imagine the fun of sledding, but instead of being pulled by a snowmobile, you were being pulled by a real car and the ice was unpredictably slippery. The goal of this game was to maintain balance and hold on for as long as possible without falling and getting hurt. This was particularly popular on snowy days when kids were home from school and needed exciting activities to entertain themselves. There were different variations of this game, sometimes involving ropes to pull a sled, but the ultimate thrill always came from seeing how long you could hold on as the car accelerated and took off. The danger was overtly clear. Just one slip of the hand could lead to children being dragged, falling headfirst onto the icy road, or even being run over by the rear wheels of the moving car. What toy created a massive sonic craze but could shatter into sharp fragments and cause permanent injuries? On the list of dangerous toys, clackers must certainly be mentioned, a toy that was both popular and unexpectedly risky. Clackers were made from two heavy, glossy acrylic balls connected by a string. The objective was simple: swing them up and down rapidly so they clacked together with a sharp sound. The faster the swing, the louder the sound, and the higher the sense of accomplishment. You see, this fun came with frightening risks. If you lost control, these hard balls could violently strike the hand, causing bruising or worse, fly straight into the face. The height of the danger was when these acrylic balls collided too hard or had manufacturing flaws. They could shatter into sharp fragments, leading to serious injuries to the player or bystanders. Due to the rising number of injury reports, clackers were quickly deemed too dangerous and were completely banned in many schools and public places. Ultimately, manufacturers had to redesign clackers, using softer and safer materials to prevent accidents. Did you ever see this popular diet sweetener? Behind seemingly harmless soda cans, it was banned due to suspicions of containing carcinogens. This artificial sweetener was 30 times sweeter than sugar and contained 0 calories, making it an ideal ingredient in diet sodas and sugar-free products. With the explosion of the diet trend, cyclamates quickly became a familiar part of the American diet. However, in 1969, major concerns arose. A study indicated that extremely high doses of cyclamates, far exceeding human consumption levels, could cause bladder tumors in test rats. Although the dosage in the study was not realistic for consumers, the fear of a potential link to cancer prompted the U.S. government to act immediately. The U.S. government banned this sweetener in 1969, and it was officially removed from the market in 1970. Interestingly, while the U.S. banned it, many other countries like Canada and European nations still permitted the use of cyclamates, showing the difference in global food safety regulations. The cyclamate ban is a powerful example of how the perception of health risk can quickly change legislation and consumer habits. Most gas stations across America sold leaded gasoline, an additive that had been used for decades to boost engine performance and prevent knocking. Drivers believed that leaded gasoline helped cars run stronger and smoother, so its use was highly favored. The characteristic smell of car exhaust back then was also associated with the presence of lead in the air. People considered it completely normal without a second thought. Soon after, a serious health issue arose. When cars burned leaded gasoline, they released toxic lead particles into the air. Scientific studies began linking lead exposure to serious health problems in humans, especially children, causing delayed neurological development and brain damage. Faced with this clear evidence, in the mid-1970s, the U.S. government acted, gradually phasing out leaded gasoline from the market. By the 1990s, leaded gasoline had almost completely disappeared, marking a significant victory for public health and the environment. Road safety was a very different concept in the 70s, defined by extremely lax seatbelt laws. Wearing a seatbelt was primarily a personal choice, not a mandatory safety requirement. Many drivers at the time thought seatbelts were restrictive or even dangerous in certain accidents. More notably, many cars from that era didn't even have rear seatbelts. Children were often allowed to move freely in the car with no car seats or restraints. The sight of a child standing on the front seat or sitting in an adult's lap while the car was moving was completely normal. Or perhaps the most familiar memory is riding in the back seat of a station wagon without a seatbelt, facing the rear window and making faces at the cars behind, despite sudden stops that would send children flying forward. With the increase in traffic accidents and studies on the importance of seatbelts, things began to change. New York became the first state to pass a mandatory seatbelt law in 1984. NHTSA studies later confirmed that seatbelts reduced the risk of death by 45% for front passengers and 60% for rear passengers. By the 1990s, seatbelt laws had become standard across the U.S., a significant change that has saved millions of lives. This might be hard to believe for today's generation, but in the 70s, children could easily buy cigarettes. Smoking was so common that a child walking into a convenience store to buy a pack of cigarettes for their parents was a normal sight. Sometimes they carried a small piece of paper with a handwritten note from a parent, but sometimes they didn't even need any proof of age. To supplement this ease, cigarette vending machines were also ubiquitous, from restaurants to public areas, allowing anyone with enough coins to purchase cigarettes without seller interaction or control. This reflects an era where public health awareness and the risks associated with tobacco were very limited. The situation today has changed dramatically. Strict age regulations, thorough ID checks, and bans on smoking in public places are widely enforced. A child attempting to buy cigarettes now is illegal and would lead to serious penalties for both the child and the seller. Back then, just stepping outside was a vast territory to explore, and abandoned or under construction places were an irresistible invitation. Exploring abandoned buildings or sneaking into construction sites was a classic 1970s activity, a way for children to fill long summer days with adventures. Groups of students frequently climbed over dangers like rusty nails, broken glass, and loose boards without considering the consequences, sometimes without even bothering. The thrill of exploring an empty, mysterious space and turning it into their own secret club or battleground was always much greater than the risk of stepping on a sharp object, scraping a knee, or even sustaining a more serious injury. No one truly worried about these risks. What's amazing is that most parents at the time didn't even know where their children were spending their afternoons. Because, our parents didn't strictly supervise but let their children grow up freely. In childhood, everyone wandered and took adventurous choices with their group of friends. This freedom defined the nature of growing up during that era. In contrast, today, these areas are considered forbidden territory. Trespassing on construction sites or abandoned buildings is illegal, and these areas are carefully fenced off, with strict warning signs due to the risk of legal liability and serious accidents. If clackers were an indoor risk, lawn darts were a deadly outdoor hazard. This garden game was a familiar part of summer barbecues with simple rules. You throw large metal darts with sharp, pointed tips across the lawn toward a circular target. The thrill of making an accurate throw and hearing the thud as the dart impaled the ground was truly wonderful. However, the frightening truth was that these darts were not only heavy, but also sharp enough to pierce the ground and, tragically, sometimes pierce a person. The combination of the weight and sharpness of the dart tip made them a potential weapon, even though they were only used for recreational purposes. Just one bad throw or a child accidentally wandering into the play area, and tragic accidents could occur, leading to serious injury or even death. The heartbreaking accidents prompted strong calls from parents and authorities. After years of debate, the US government took decisive action. In the late 1980s, the sale and use of lawn darts with sharp tips were completely banned. This ban is one of the clearest examples of government intervention into consumer products that were once considered normal to prioritize public safety and protect children. Have you ever played any of these games? Comment below and let us know your most dangerous memory. Did you know that your favorite toy oven back then was actually a mini oven powered by an ordinary incandescent light bulb? In the 70s, there was no better feeling than baking tiny cakes yourself using the magical Easy Bake Oven. It was every child's dream. What's amazing is that this version of the oven used an ordinary incandescent light bulb to cook your food. You would tear open the cake mix packet, stir it, place the tiny pan inside the oven, and then sit back and wait, watching the light bulb do its work. Although the results were not always the tastiest, sometimes they were a little strange. The real joy was in the process of making it and the satisfaction of saying, "I made this." However, that very incandescent light bulb posed a significant risk. It became extremely hot, often reaching temperatures above 350 degrees Fahrenheit, putting children at risk of severe burns if they accidentally touch the inside of the oven. The use of such an accessible heat source with the potential for serious injury completely failed to meet any safety standards. Reports of injuries, with some children sustaining second-degree burns, increased over time. Therefore, in the early 2000s, modern Easy Bake ovens replaced the light bulb with a safer, enclosed heating element, eliminating this serious hazard. Another serious issue related to traffic safety in the 70s was the astonishing reality of widespread drinking and driving. The legal blood alcohol concentration, BAC, limit back then was also much looser than today. In many states, you could legally drive with a BAC of 0.10%, or higher, a level that is considered extremely dangerous today. Having a few drinks and driving home was not uncommon, and awareness of the risks of this behavior was very limited. This comfort with drinking and driving led to unacceptable consequences, especially the increase in fatal traffic accidents. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, a powerful organization was formed, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, MADD. MAD and other advocacy groups fought tirelessly to pass stricter driving under the influence laws. As a result, by the mid-1980s, most states had lowered the legal BAC limit to 0.08%. This fight completely changed how we view driving after drinking, transforming it from an accepted behavior into a serious crime. Did you enjoy this trip down memory lane? Share this video with your friends to relive these nostalgic days. Can you believe that there was a time when you could walk straight to the gate without security checks, no X-ray scanners, and the cockpit door wasn't even locked? Air travel in the 70s offered an astonishing sense of comfort and simplicity. Customers could go straight to the gate without enduring long security lines, no X-ray scanners, and no liquid restrictions. Notably, cockpit doors were also not locked mid-flight. Although it offered great convenience, this lack of security created a serious vulnerability. The reason for the change stemmed from the crisis of hijacking incidents. This lack of security led to a sharp increase in hijacking incidents. In 1972 alone, over 200 hijackings were recorded. The hijacking tragedies showed that the aviation security system needed to be re-evaluated. Subsequently, the attacks of September 11th, 2001 completely changed the landscape of air travel. This event led to the establishment of the TSA and the implementation of unprecedentedly strict security measures, including thorough baggage checks and full body scans. Security today is an absolute priority, and unlocked cockpit doors like in the 70s are unimaginable. The TSA has implemented unprecedented security measures, from thorough baggage checks to full body scans, making the air travel experience completely different from before. You might be surprised to know that during this period, owning exotic pets without a license was very common and largely unregulated. People could easily buy an exotic iguana, a colorful macaw, or even a large boa constrictor from pet stores with little oversight. Regulations regarding origin, documentation, or care were virtually non-existent, and most importantly, no special permit was needed to own these animals. Soon after the exotic pet trade exploded, concerns about public safety, animal welfare, and ecological impact also increased. There were cases of escaped or abandoned pets, sometimes becoming invasive species negatively affecting native ecosystems. To address this issue, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service introduced regulations in 1980. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, most states had enacted laws requiring permits to own exotic pets, ensuring that their keeping was more tightly controlled and safer for both the animals and the community. If you grew up in the 70s, you might remember the taste of fresh, whole milk poured directly from glass bottles and advertised with countless health benefits. Buying raw milk was completely normal, even sought after for its distinctive creamy flavor and rumored health benefits. This was a time when natural and unprocessed products were highly valued, and many believed it was the optimal source of nutrition. Farmers and small dairies often sold products directly to consumers without any restrictions on this activity. However, behind the attractive appearance and health beliefs was a frightening hidden risk. Concerns about foodborne illnesses began to emerge, directly related to the consumption of unpasteurized milk. We are talking about serious pathogens like Salmonella, E. coli, and Listeria, which can cause severe infection outbreaks. In the realm of health and food, one additive caused major concern: red dye number 2. This synthetic coloring was widely used to create bright and attractive red hues in many different foods and drinks on the market. It was part of the visual appeal for sweets and snacks back then. As studies began to suggest a link between this dye and potential health risks, although the scientific conclusions were not entirely clear. Public anxiety increased, creating pressure on manufacturers. Interestingly, even M&M's, despite never using red dye number 2, they used red dye number 40, decided to stop producing red M&M's candies in 1976 to avoid customer concern. Ultimately, to ensure consumer safety and react to public anxiety, the U.S. government officially banned red dye number 2 in 1976. Red M&M's later returned in 1987 when red dye number 40 was determined to be safe. This story is a classic example of how public perception, even when sometimes not entirely based on absolute scientific fact, can significantly shape business decisions and government regulations. If you think this change in public safety awareness was necessary, hit the hype button right below the video to support today's safety rules. The topic of cigarettes did not stop at easy purchase but infiltrated the school environment itself, a reality that is completely unimaginable today. One thing that was once normal but has now vanished completely is high school smoking areas. Yes, you heard that right. Many high schools back then had special designated areas where students could smoke openly between classes. Teenagers could freely smoke without facing any opposition. Notably, many teachers also smoked right on campus, which further made the atmosphere smokier and reinforced the normalization of smoking behavior. It was only years later, as public health awareness and the dangers of secondhand smoke increased, that attitudes began to change. By the late 1980s, schools began rapidly eliminating these smoking areas. By the 1990s, the idea of students and teachers openly smoking on school grounds had become genuinely shocking and almost non-existent. This is clear evidence of how society has prioritized the health of the younger generation, turning an acceptable habit into an absolutely forbidden behavior. If you ever flew in the 70s, you will immediately remember the image of the airplane cabin often being thick with cigarette smoke. Smoking on planes was completely normal, and although airlines had designated smoking and non-smoking sections, the smoke still spread everywhere, engulfing the entire cabin. To cater to this need, ashtrays were built right into every passenger armrest, ready to be used. You could easily see the person next to you comfortably smoking without much thought for those around them. For many, flying came with smoking, an astonishing fact given today's clean air regulations. As the dangerous impact of secondhand smoke became increasingly clear, pressure from the public and health organizations rose significantly. People began to realize that inhaling others' smoke was also seriously harmful to health. In response to these concerns, the ban on smoking on short domestic flights in the US began in 1988. By 2000, this regulation was further tightened. Smoking was completely banned on all flights in the US, regardless of length, domestic or international. This was a massive change that resulted in cleaner air and protected the health of millions of passengers. Before safety laws, child car seats were just convenient boxes, not designed to protect your child from a collision. Laws regarding child safety seats were nearly non-existent. Most parents at the time relied only on the standard car seat belt. If available, or worse, held their children in their laps while traveling by car. Although child car seats existed, they were primarily designed for convenience rather than protection. No strict crash test standards were applied to these seats, meaning they did not actually protect children in the event of an accident. It was assumed that adult supervision was enough, a belief shaped by the high-risk acceptance of the era. The reason for the change was a horrifying awakening to mortality statistics. A groundbreaking study in 1985 by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration completely changed this perception. The study revealed a painful truth. Car accidents were the leading cause of death for children aged 1 to 4. This shocking statistic prompted a powerful wave of change in attitudes and laws. As a result, today, every state across the US has enacted mandatory child safety seat laws. These seats must meet strict safety standards and undergo thorough crash testing, ensuring maximum safety for our youngest passengers. It was not uncommon to see children riding bikes, skateboards, or scooters barefoot and shirtless. Summer afternoons were spent speeding down hills, the wind whipping through their hair, with nothing separating their bodies from the rough pavement. This comfort and freedom in attire was a hallmark of an era where personal safety rules were less concerned. The risks were obvious: cuts, stings, scrapes, and even rashes. But these risks didn't stop children from having as much fun as possible. Children simply didn't worry about shielding their bodies after a hard fall. After a long day of adventuring, Mom was always ready with the standard 70s first aid measures. She always had antiseptic solutions like Bactine or mercurochrome ready to treat scrapes, and calamine lotion for ailments like poison ivy, which was ubiquitous at the time. And of course, there were always Band-Aids from the famous metal tin. In stark contrast to the past, riding without a helmet and protective gear would now be considered seriously irresponsible, illustrating the change in social norms and the priority of personal safety. Growing up in this memorable decade, owning a BB airgun was a frequent and popular pastime. It was an integral part of free and unsupervised childhood. The shooting targets were often old soda cans placed in the backyard, but the real fun came from carrying these guns around the neighborhood, almost a symbol of independence and adventure. The story didn't stop at target practice. Many children also organized BB gunfights with their friends. In those days, getting shot by a BB wasn't scary, but was even considered a badge of honor, as if you were participating in a small war. The wound on bare skin could leave a large and painful swelling, a so-called welt, but it would heal and didn't stop that child from continuing the game the next day. A rather shocking fact is that people seem to have a much higher tolerance for danger. Of course, BB guns could ricochet and hit someone's face or eye, but this was just considered an acceptable risk in that era. It was only a few years later that carrying air guns or participating in unsupervised BB wars became unacceptable behavior in many areas, and was often considered illegal, especially in the absence of adult supervision and safety awareness. It's fortunate that people realized that a seemingly fun game posed an unexpected security threat. Another aspect of the 1970s that feels shocking by today's standards is the presence of child labor. Although the Fair Labor Standards Act had been in place since 1938, regulations around child employment were still relatively loose throughout the decade. It wasn't uncommon for children to work, especially in agriculture, family-run businesses, or low-income households. Many parents believed that having a job at a young age helped build character, responsibility, and discipline. Kids often took part in manual labor, helped out in stores, or worked on farms. But as society progressed, concerns grew about the dangers children faced on the job, from operating heavy machinery to exposure to toxic chemicals. In 1976, the Child Labor Amendment was introduced, and by 1989, the United Nations adopted the Convention on the Rights of the Child. Today, the United States enforces stricter labor standards under the FLSA, prohibiting minors from working in hazardous conditions and limiting their hours of work. You will definitely remember an essential sweet treat from childhood: candy cigarettes. They were widely available in every convenience store, designed with incredible detail to mimic real cigarettes. You would see them with crisp white paper wrapping and notably a red tip like a lit cigarette. Some varieties were even made to produce a puff of sugar dust smoke when children blew into them, making the pretend game even more realistic. It was endless fun to imitate the way adults held, flicked, and smoked cigarettes with style. At the time, most parents didn't worry about these candies. Why? Because smoking was incredibly popular. You could see smokers everywhere, on TV with glamorous ads for the Marlboro Man, in restaurants, and even on planes. As time passed and our awareness of the health risks of smoking increased, concerns about candy cigarettes began to appear. Critics argued that these candy sticks normalized smoking behavior in children, potentially leading them to smoke real cigarettes later in life. By the end of the 20th century, many countries restricted their sale or required them to be renamed as candy sticks and remove all cigarette-like designs. If you thought lead was only in gasoline, remember lead-based paint. In the 70s, lead-based paint was extremely popular. It was used to paint houses, schools, playground equipment, toys, and even children's cribs. It was favored for its high durability, ability to hold color well, and beautiful gloss. The image of brightly colored, long-lasting houses was often thanks to this type of paint. However, like leaded gasoline, research on lead poisoning from paint increased. It showed that children exposed to lead dust or chipping paint could suffer severe health problems such as delayed development, organ damage, and many other ailments. This was a potential threat right inside our own homes. Therefore, in 1978, lead-based paint was banned for use in residential areas. Although the ban was enacted, the reality is that millions of older homes from those decades still contain this type of paint, requiring special safe handling measures during renovation to protect the health of future generations. Another thing that was once normal but is now strictly restricted is flame retardants. In the 70s, these chemicals were ubiquitous in our daily lives, from children's pajamas and furniture to ordinary clothing. Their purpose was to prevent fires, slow down the burning process, and improve product safety. People at the time believed this was a necessary protective measure. What few realized at the time were the potential dangers of the chemicals themselves. Studies gradually showed that flame retardants could be absorbed through the skin or respiratory tract, and began linking them to serious health problems like hormone disruption and cancer. This led to the introduction of stricter regulations and the banning of many types of flame retardants in the 2000s. Notably, older furniture, especially from the 70s and 80s, may still contain high concentrations of these toxic chemicals, showing the long-term impact of past industrial decisions. In the spirit of free daily wandering, outdoor snacking was an experience full of discovery and risk. When children were free to play, they often snacked on wild berries or sipped honeysuckle nectar. This was part of the carefree spirit of the time. If it looked like food, children would try it, and most adults agreed. This activity added an element of adventure to playing in the yard or exploring the neighborhood. However, there was always a small possibility of eating something poisonous or having a serious allergic reaction. Although this idea seems reckless today, in the 70s it wasn't a major concern. Most children were taught by their parents about which wild plants were safe to eat, but this knowledge still came with a level of risk unacceptable in today's society. Lack of plant knowledge could be a serious danger. Today, parents tend to be much more cautious about allowing children to consume anything they find outdoors, emphasizing the shift from trusting instinct to prioritizing absolute risk control. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to Back to Yesterday. That is the best way to help our channel grow and spread these fascinating historical stories to more people. Your support is the greatest motivation for us to continue exploring and sharing about the amazing evolution of everyday life.